Hey guys, it's Mike here, and I just finished watching Mandalorian Season 1, which is the new Star Wars live-action series on Disney+. Now, as I've talked about in a number of videos on this channel, I'm not particularly a fan of the direction that Disney has gone in with the Star Wars franchise since they acquired it from George Lucas, a sentiment that more and more people have begun to agree with since The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker came out. The entire sequel trilogy has been a big waste of potential, which I plan on discussing more in depth in a future video. However, with this being said, when I first heard about The Mandalorian, and then I saw the promotional material for the show, I was intrigued. It's a show that was created by Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, with Favreau helping to create the MCU, and Dave Filoni being the one who created the Clone Wars TV show, and was kind of a disciple of George Lucas, back before Disney acquired Lucasfilm. These two men are very talented at what they do and clearly have a love for Star Wars, so it seemed like everything was going to be in good hands with them. And even better is the fact that Kathleen Kennedy seemingly had little involvement in this series. So I decided to give this show a chance and see if it could do right what the other properties under Disney have failed to accomplish. And upon finishing Season 1, I would have to say that this show is great, and is very much Star Wars done right. Now there will be some spoilers in this video for Season 1, but I assume that most of you have already seen this series, or at least curious to see what happens. So without further ado, let's get into this review. Now the plot of The Mandalorian follows the titular Mandalorian, who is a bounty hunter going around the Star Wars galaxy taking various jobs from the bounty hunting guild. He's a loner, and is one of the best at what he does, being even more mythical to others around him because of the fact that his people have been mostly wiped out, and the rest went into hiding. However, everything changes for him one day when he takes a bounty that ends up being the child of the same unnamed species as Yoda, known by fans as Baby Yoda. And he must make a decision which results in him protecting the child and fighting against bounty hunters as well as former Imperial soldiers, in order to defend this bounty and get to the center of the conspiracy surrounding it, with a lot of awesome action along the way. Now there's a lot of pros to the series, beginning first with the Mandalorian character himself, who's played excellently by Pedro Pascal, who you may remember from Game of Thrones and Narcos. He's a loner, much in the vein of Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name, and of course, Judge Dredd, with them both having a strong code that they abide by and refusing to remove their helmets, which ties in with the Mandalorian creed. Much like in the Clone Wars and Rebels, we learn more about the Mandalorians here, who are in hiding after their planet was decimated and their people largely wiped out. Mando wasn't born on that world, but is rather a foundling, whose family was killed when he was a child. After being saved by the Mandalorians, he joined their warrior people and became the badass that he is today, representing their creed the best he can. He in the series makes for a really interesting premise that I've always wanted to see explored more in Star Wars, diving into the seedy underworld and the lives of the bounty hunters. And they did a great job of using this character as an avatar to expand upon what we've seen in Return of the Jedi, Clone Wars, and beyond. Other notable standouts of the cast are Carl Weathers, who I was happy to see here and joining the Star Wars universe. He's best well known for playing Apollo Creed in the Rocky movies, and of course Dylan from Predator, one of my favorite movies. He does well here as a higher up in the Bounty Hunters Guild, at first appearing antagonistic, but then eventually joining the Mandalorian to help him on his quest. Werner Herzog appears as an ex-Empire officer and one of the main antagonists. I've always been a fan of his films, and he's great at playing a villain, especially because of his unique voice and way of speaking. Gina Carano is also cast here as an ex-paratrooper, and at first I was concerned about her acting, since it had a lot of room for improvement in movies like Fast 5. However, she did surprisingly well here. She's a legit badass in real life, and at one point was viewed as the face of women's mixed martial arts, and so she works well here in all of the action sequences. You never don't buy her beating down grown men, as he would with, say, Danny Ramos in Terminator Dark Fate. And of course, Giancarlo Esposito is also in this as Moff Gideon. He was one of the best parts of the Breaking Bad franchise as Gustavo Fring, and has shown he's capable of doing a great villainous performance, and he's really good for the screen time he gets here, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing more of him in this role as the story progresses. But then of course there's Baby Yoda, who has taken the internet by storm by being perhaps the cutest character in the franchise, and there have been memes aplenty as a result. He's a pretty entertaining character, being one of the few members of Yoda's unnamed species that we see in this franchise. Despite being 50 years old, he's a baby, which I think is a little odd since I never pictured Yoda's species aging that slowly, but rather him being so old due to his incredible power and connection with the Force. And speaking of that, Baby Yoda also has powerful Force abilities of his own, which he uses throughout the season. And while it is a little questionable that he would have powers like this, especially without any known training, at least they balanced it by making the use of his powers exhaust him, rather than someone like Rey, who can also use powers without training, and has Goku circa tournament to power levels of stamina. And most of these characters get their own arcs and develop as the story goes along, although it can be a little rushed, which I'll discuss more in depth shortly. But for the most part, it doesn't feel forced, no pun intended. Another thing that will please fans is the sheer number of references, as the series rewards longtime viewers with allusions to the prequel trilogy, original trilogy, and even the holiday special, by referencing Life Day and Boba Fett's weapon. They even reference other movies like Indiana Jones, Predator, and of course westerns, as this entire series has a strong spaghetti western feel, which is very much in line with Star Wars' influences and origins as a series. Really, the entire series feels like it belongs in the Star Wars universe, having the same tone, visual aesthetics, and feel of the original trilogy, and at times the prequels, even going into some wacky territory. Occasionally it sort of overdoes it on the goofiness, but Star Wars has always had wacky elements, and they work well with the humor of the show, which can be quite meta at times, such as in the final episode with the stormtroopers having their own banter, and then failing to hit their targets time and time again, which was pretty funny. Now perhaps you could say that the fan service goes too far at points, such as the episode on Tatooine, or the countless references, but honestly after watching Rise of Skywalker, it feels a lot less invasive now. Getting into the more technical aspects here, this series is made all the better by the all-star group of directors who helmed each episode, such as Taika Waititi, who did the excellent finale, Deborah Chow, who has also worked on shows like Jessica Jones in the past, as well as Bryce Dallas Howard, who made her debut as a director and did a fine job with the episode. Dave Filoni also debuted as a live-action director here, helming the debut of the series. However, he also directed what is likely the weakest episode this season with episode 5, which unfortunately just didn't work overall, but thankfully wasn't a sign of an overall decline in series quality. As far as the effects goes, the practical effects are great for the most part. The outfits, armor, weapons, and ships are pretty much movie quality, using a number of tried and true methods such as models, miniatures, and possibly stop motion at points. However, as is usually the case with TV, the CGI is pretty weak at times and not up to the same par. TV productions, even with high budgets, never really have the best CGI, and they're better off sticking to practical effects as much as possible, only using CGI to enhance rather than replace. But that should be the case for most productions anyway. Additionally, the score was really well done this season, varying depending upon the scene, and adding rather than detracting from moments. Plus, the outro song is really catchy, and it's been stuck in my head for weeks now, especially while working on this review. The action is pretty great too overall, with some awesome shootouts, chase scenes, and fights in a variety of locations and situations, some of them feeling like they're straight out of a video game, but in a good way. So Star Wars fans who are looking for some good action will definitely appreciate those sequences. Now as far as cons go, the biggest one is likely that the episodes are simply not long enough. The episodes are closer to 30 minutes than an hour, which unfortunately results in a lot of story and development coming off as rushed and overly condensed. While it works in a series that has tens of episodes, Mandalorian Season 1 only had 8. which is more in line with something like a Netflix series, and with some of these episodes being largely filler. So hopefully next season they'll expand the length of these episodes, or at least do more of them. However, since they're already shooting and working on it now, I have my doubts that will happen. But enough fans have voiced this concern to where it is still possible that they'll make some adjustments to the runtime. Now, as for some things I would like to see in the next season, they left off on a cliffhanger that the Mandalorian now has Baby Yoda under his wing, and his goal now is either to deliver him to the remaining Jedi, or perhaps to Yoda's homeworld, which I think would be really interesting to finally see since George Lucas himself has never really given us any information about what Yoda's species is, or where they live. And considering that we see someone wearing the insignia of Kamino earlier in the season, I think it would also be pretty cool if the Mandalorian goes there and also sees what's going on with the cloners. For all we know, they're still making clone troops there, maybe even based on Jango Fett. And considering the fact that a lot of people wanted to see Boba Fett in this season, I wouldn't be surprised if he shows up next season as well. Maybe with him still even living at Kamino. And it would be cool to see one Mandalorian bounty hunter versus another one. It would also be cool to see some other characters from the Clone Wars and Rebels show up in Season 2, such as Satine, a Mandalorian herself who's directly connected to the Mandalorian royal family, and then some of the other bounty hunters such as Cad Bane. And maybe you can even bring Ezra into live action, considering that his story was never actually tied up in the finale of Rebels. However, as far as things I hope don't happen, I hope they don't go way too crazy with the fan service and just have everything be fan service next season, especially as a response to the negative sentiment around the sequel trilogy. And also, I think it would kind of suck if everyone just dies because, as we know, everything is eventually going to be leading up to Episode 7 and the sequel trilogy where none of these characters appear in it. So hopefully they just don't kill everyone off because they weren't there to begin with. Because I feel like that would be a kind of underwhelming and disappointing ending. Although for all we know, there's going to be many more seasons to come. So The Mandalorian is a perfect example of Star Wars done right. It shows that when placed in the hands of competent filmmakers, this franchise can still put out some great material, with this season being the best since the Clone Wars. And if they improve upon this season with Season 2 and address some of the flaws that fans have brought up, then Season 2 will no doubt be even better and perhaps some of the best Star Wars since the original trilogy, which is very high praise indeed. So have you guys seen The Mandalorian? And if so, what do you think about it? Let me know down below. Make sure to like this video and share it around on social media because it really helps the channel. Thanks for watching and make sure to stick around because there's a lot more to come in the future. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and enable notifications so you can see all of my content right away when it comes out.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.